Cadden Ventra sat at the edge of the docking bay, swinging his legs like a kid at a candy store window. If the candy was a spaceship, and the window was a plasma barrier keeping out the cold, unwelcoming void. The Arcadia, a space station with more personality than most of its inhabitants, was humming with activity. Sentient and sassy, the station had a way of intruding in conversations, like a nosy neighbor with a penchant for eavesdropping. "You ready, sunshine?" Arcadia's voice buzzed in Cadden's earpiece, the words dripping with sarcasm. "Our Vellari friends are about to grace us with their awe-inspiring presence." "As ready as I'll ever be, Arcadia," Cadden muttered, adjusting his liaison badge that insisted on jabbing into his chest like a metal mosquito. "Let's hope they don't eat humans for breakfast." "If they did, you'd be a light snack," Arcadia quipped back, the station's AI already winning their daily banter. Cadden shrugged, striding towards the bay doors with all the confidence of a man walking into a lion's den armed with a butter knife. The doors hissed open, revealing the ship of the Vellari envoy, an ominous, sleek vessel that looked like it could slice through space itself. Out sauntered Turak of the Vellari, moving with the languid grace of a creature who knew exactly how intimidating it looked. Tall, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glimmered with untold secrets, Turak paused, surveying the docking bay with an air of disapproval. "Welcome to Arcadia," Cadden said, mustering his most charming grin, a grin that usually worked wonders at the station's seedy bar. "I'm Cadden Ventra, your humble human liaison." "Humble?" Turak's voice was smooth, like velvet over a blade. "A rare trait among your kind, I hear. We like to surprise," Cadden replied, hoping the sweat on his palms didn't show. "Here for the cultural exchange or just looking to ridicule our primitive ways?" "A bit of both, perhaps," Turak said, a flash of amusement, or was it malice, crossing those inscrutable eyes. "Your station has a reputation among the stars." "Arcadia." "She's a real charmer," Cadden said, casting a sideways glance at the nearest comm panel. "Just don't let her hear you say otherwise." "I'm always listening," Arcadia chimed in, the voice echoing through the bay with a hint of mischief. "Welcome, Vellari, try not to break anything." "I'll do my best," Turak replied, a smile just touching his lips, not quite friendly, not quite threatening. An expression that spoke volumes in the language of politicians everywhere. They moved into the station's bustling corridors, a chaotic symphony of humans, androids, and the occasional alien visitor. It was a melting pot of the galaxy's lesser-loved species, all crammed into Arcadia's steel embrace. "So," Cadden said, sidestepping a maintenance drone intent on committing vehicular manslaughter, "what's your impression of our fine establishment so far?" Turak paused, considering the kaleidoscope of life around them. "Colorful," he said finally, the word wrapped in layers of meaning. "And noisy." "That's humanity for you," Cadden chuckled. "Loud and obnoxious but somehow endearing. Like a puppy that keeps peeing on the carpet. Or perhaps a species that doesn't know its place," Turak countered, his tone playful yet pointed. "Oh, we know our place," Cadden shot back. "We just prefer to pretend it's at the top of the food chain." Their banter was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Amara Keel, the station's resident hardass, and a woman whose patience was thinner than a sheet of graphene. She was all business, with sharp eyes that could eviscerate a man at 30 paces. "Turak, welcome," she said, her smile as forced as a politician's handshake. "I trust Cadden hasn't insulted your entire species yet." "Not yet," Turak replied, "but we're only 5 minutes into our acquaintance." "I'm working up to it," Cadden assured her, earning himself a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "We've prepared a small reception in your honor," Captain Keel continued, gesturing towards a side corridor. "A chance for you to engage with some of our more dignified residents." "Dignified?" Cadden muttered under his breath. "Did we import them special?" The reception was a modest affair in Arcadia's version of a conference room, a space that smelled vaguely of engine oil and burnt coffee. A handful of humans were milling about, pretending to be interested in the Vellari envoy. "Welcome," said a grizzled engineer, thrusting a drink towards Turak. This is our finest synth brew. Tastes like engine degreaser, but it'll grow on you, like a fungus. Charmed, I'm sure, Turek replied, taking the glass with the air of someone who knew better than to drink strange fluids but was too polite to refuse. Cadden, meanwhile, was watching the room like a hawk, or perhaps a vulture, waiting for the first hint of chaos he could swoop down on. "Try not to spook the alien," he whispered to one of the younger officers who was staring at Turek like a rabbit in headlights. "Right," the officer muttered, tearing his gaze away with visible effort. "Sorry, boss." "No problem," Cadden said, clapping him on the back. "Just remember, they are probably just as scared of us as we are of them." "You think so?" the officer asked, a hopeful note in his voice. "Nah," Cadden grinned. "They're probably planning to enslave us all, but it's nice to dream." The reception dragged on, an awkward dance of stilted conversations and strained smiles. Cadden found himself loitering near the snack table, which was suspiciously devoid of anything appetizing. "Is this supposed to be food?" he asked the nearest android, who was busy arranging the platters with all the enthusiasm of a bored teenager. "Affirmative," the android replied, its voice flat and devoid of empathy. "Nutritionally balanced for 43 species. And appealing to none," Cadden remarked, poking a gelatinous cube that wobbled ominously. "I think this one's still alive." "It's a delicacy," the android assured him, though it sounded about as convinced as Cadden felt. As the evening wore on, Turek seemed to grow more at ease, mingling with the humans, though always with a hint of detachment, like a scientist observing a particularly curious bacteria. Eventually, Cadden found himself alone with Turek, the rest of the room seemingly distracted by a minor scuffle between two androids, something about incompatible software updates, and a misunderstanding over who was supposed to have the last cube of suspiciously blue cheese. "So," Cadden said, leaning casually against the wall, "how do we measure up to the stories you've heard? You humans are certainly unique," Turek replied, that enigmatic smile once again on his lips. "But there's something intriguing about your species." "Is that a compliment or an insult?" Cadden asked, only half joking. "A bit of both," Turek admitted. "I think your kind would call it potential." "Potential for what?" Cadden pressed, sensing the hint of something deeper lurking beneath the surface. Turek's gaze flicked to the view outside, where the swirling stars painted a mesmerizing backdrop. "That," he said, "is what we're here to find out." Cadden didn't like mysteries, especially not when they came wrapped in alien skin and cryptic smiles. "You're not just here for the cultural exchange, are you?" he asked, his voice low. "Not entirely," Turek conceded. "There are those among us who believe humanity might play a crucial role in the times to come." "A role in what?" Cadden demanded, trying to ignore the cold shiver running down his spine. But before Turek could reply, an alarm blared through the station, the lights flickering ominously. "Arcadia, what's going on?" Cadden snapped, all business now as the room descended into chaos. "We've got a breach," Arcadia's voice crackled through the speakers, tinged with urgency. "Unidentified ships just dropped out of warp. Looks like your diplomatic mission just got a lot more interesting." "Fantastic," Cadden muttered, turning to Turek. "Welcome to Arcadia, where the fun never stops." Turek's eyes gleamed with an intensity that was both unsettling and thrilling. "Looks like we're about to see what humanity is really made of," he said, his voice a mix of anticipation and something else, something Cadden couldn't quite place. And in that moment, as the station shuddered around them, Cadden couldn't help but wonder if he'd just stepped into something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. The alarm blared like a banshee with a grudge, echoing through Arcadia's corridors and sending everyone scurrying like rats off a sinking ship. Cadden's heart was pounding in a rhythm that could power a small engine, but he forced a smirk for Turek's benefit. "Our station's version of a warm welcome." Turek's eyes sparkled, glancing around at the chaos with a serene sort of amusement. "I must say you humans do know how to keep things interesting." "Yeah, well, we call it organized chaos." "Heavy on the chaos," Cadden replied, jogging towards the command center with Turek in tow. Arcadia, status report. Unidentified ships have breached our perimeter. Arcadia's voice chimed in confident, even if a little too cheerful given the circumstances. Might want to tell your guests to fasten their seatbelts. Fantastic. Just another day in paradise, Cadden muttered, ushering Turek into the command hub where Captain Keel was already barking orders like a drill sergeant on a caffeine high. Ventra, about time you showed up, she snapped, not bothering to look away from the holographic display that lit up the room with a ghostly blue glow. I've been busy playing host, Cadden quipped, sliding into his chair and pulling up the sensor logs. What have we got? Pirates, mercenaries, or just your run-of-the-mill interstellar hooligans? Something new, Captain Keel replied, her eyes narrowing at the display. No known registration, no hails, and they're moving like they own the place. Technically, nobody owns space, Cadden pointed out, but the glare he received could have melted steel. And yet everyone keeps trying, Turek added, leaning over to inspect the data. Interesting maneuvering patterns. They're testing your defenses. Well, aren't we just the test case of the month? Cadden muttered. Suggestions. Survive, Turek said, his smile all teeth. It's what you humans do best, isn't it? Yeah, when we're not busy screwing everything up, Cadden shot back, watching as the blips on the screen danced dangerously close to the station. Ventra, focus, Keel interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut through sheet metal. We need to figure out what they want. They didn't RSVP, so I'm guessing it's not tea and biscuits, Cadden replied dryly, his fingers darting across the controls as he accessed the station's defensive systems. Arcadia, bless her digital heart, was already one step ahead, deploying plasma barriers and scrambling fighters. I do hope everyone packed their pajamas. We might be here all night. Thanks for the heads up, Cadden sighed, watching as the tactical readout updated to show Arcadia's automated defenses springing to life, sleek fighter drones launching from their bays like angry hornets. You know, Turek mused, in the Vellari domain we have a saying, there is no problem so great that it cannot be solved with a sufficiently large explosion. Well, here we prefer a smaller explosion, preferably one that doesn't blow us up too, Cadden replied, though he couldn't help but wish they had a few more explosive solutions right now. The unidentified ships continued their assault, battering against Arcadia's shields with all the subtlety of a drunken brawler. The station rocked under the impact, and Cadden's stomach did an unpleasant flip as the artificial gravity struggled to compensate. Arcadia, how are we holding up? He grunted, bracing himself against the console. Shields are holding for now, Arcadia replied, her tone a touch too smug for comfort. I'd say we have at least a 50-50 shot at not being space debris. Always the optimist, Cadden muttered, watching the tactical display as the enemy ships broke off their attack and began circling like vultures. They're up to something. Whatever it is, I don't like it, Keel said, her eyes fixed on the display. Keep our defenses up, Ventra, and someone get me a line to HQ. We need backup. I wouldn't hold my breath, Cadden said, grimacing at the thought of dealing with higher-ups. HQ about as responsive as a corpse at a wake. Then we'll just have to manage on our own, Keel replied, her jaw set with grim determination. Arcadia, keep us posted. Always do, Captain, Arcadia responded with a hint of sass. But if this keeps up, you might want to start considering your retirement plan. Cadden chuckled despite himself, the tension in the room easing just a fraction. So, Turek, he said, turning to the Vellari envoy, enjoying the show. Immensely, Turek replied, his expression one of genuine intrigue. I must say this is far more entertaining than any war simulation the Vellari have devised. Glad we could oblige, Cadden said dryly. Just another day on Arcadia. The station shuddered again, the lights flickering ominously as the enemy ships renewed their assault. Cadden swore under his breath, scrambling to reroute power to the shields. Arcadia, he barked, any ideas on how to get these bastards off our backs? I'm already running a diagnostic, dear, Arcadia replied, almost sounding fond. Though I'd appreciate it if you didn't break anything else in the meantime. No promises, Cadden muttered, casting a glance at Turak. Any bright ideas from the Vellari playbook? Turak considered for a moment before nodding. You humans have a saying, if you can't beat them, confuse them. That's not quite how it goes, but I like where your head's at, Cadden said, grinning. If we can create a diversion, Turak continued, it might buy us enough time to regroup. Great plan, Keel cut in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Now, if only we had a way to execute it. Cadden's mind was racing, trying to connect dots that seemed determined to stay unconnected. Maybe we don't need to outgun them, he said slowly, the germ of an idea taking root. We just need to outsmart them. Do you have something specific in mind, or are you just blowing smoke? Keel asked, one eyebrow raised skeptically. A bit of both, Cadden replied, not missing a beat. Arcadia, how are sensor arrays looking? Intact, surprisingly, Arcadia answered. I take it you have a plan. This is a terrible idea, Cadden muttered, as much to himself as to anyone else. But if we can rig the arrays to emit a decoy signal, we might be able to trick them into thinking we've got reinforcements inbound. It's risky, Turak said, though there was a note of approval in his voice. Everything's risky, Cadden replied with a shrug. But it beats sitting here waiting to be space dust. Captain Keel gave a reluctant nod. Do it. But if this doesn't work, Ventra, I'm holding you personally responsible. Wouldn't have it any other way, Cadden said, already working the controls. The station continued to shake as the enemy ships pressed their attack, but Cadden refused to let that rattle him. He was in the zone, or at least the closest approximation of it under the circumstances, fingers flying over the console as he rerouted power and activated the sensor arrays. Arcadia, on my mark, broadcast the decoy signal, he said, focused as a laser. Ready when you are, Arcadia replied, her voice a steady presence amidst the chaos. Cadden hesitated for just a moment, a tiny voice in the back of his mind reminding him that this could all go spectacularly wrong, but he'd never been one to let a little thing like doubt stop him. Do it, he ordered, and Arcadia unleashed the decoy. For a moment, nothing happened. The enemy ships continued their assault, and Cadden's heart sank like a rock in a black hole. But then, just as hope began to wither, the ships veered off, breaking formation and moving to intercept the phantom threat. Looks like they took the bait, Turak observed, his voice calm amidst the chaos. Don't sound so surprised, Cadden replied, though relief was already washing over him. I'm not as dumb as I look. Thank the stars for small mercies, Keel muttered, her attention shifting back to the tactical display. Now let's see if we can get ourselves out of this mess. With the immediate threat abated, the room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Cadden slumped back in his chair, adrenaline still coursing through his veins like a high-octane fuel. Arcadia, keep monitoring their movements, Keel instructed, already planning their next move. And Ventra, good work. You might be a pain in the ass, but you're our pain in the ass. High praise coming from you, Cadden quipped, though he couldn't entirely hide the satisfaction in his voice. Don't let it go to your head, Keel warned him, but her usual sharpness was softened by the barest hint of a smile. Turak, meanwhile, was watching with an expression of mild amusement. I must admit, your tactics are unconventional. That's one way to put it, Cadden replied, too exhausted to put much effort into a rebuttal. So, what do you think? Are we still worth the trouble? Turak's eyes gleamed with that inscrutable alien light. More than ever, I'd say. The words hung in the air, laden with unspoken possibilities and future conflicts yet to come. But for now, with the enemy retreating and Arcadia still holding together, Cadden allowed himself a moment of triumph. They'd survived another day, and around these parts, that was no small feat. Cadden Ventra sat in the command hub of Arcadia, the space stations grumbling and groaning like an old warhorse that had seen better days. If there was a universal constant, it was that nothing worked quite right when you needed it to, especially when the place was under siege by ships that were more mysterious than the current appeal of synth-pop music. The immediate crisis had been averted, but the air was still thick with the scent of panic and burnt circuitry. Cadden rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to stave off the impending headache that was already forming like a storm on the horizon. It was only a matter of time before the real trouble started. "You look like you've been trampled by a herd of angry space cows," Arcadia chimed in with her usual sass, her voice echoing through the hub. "Thanks, Arcadia," Cadden replied dryly. "I always appreciate constructive criticism from a glorified toaster." "Anytime, dear," Arcadia said, unfazed. "And don't worry, you wear the disheveled, impending doom look well." "Flattery will get you everywhere," he muttered, turning his attention back to the display. The enemy ships had retreated, but they'd left a mess behind. Not just material damage, but something far more insidious. It had started small. A few of the station's personnel had been distracted, sluggish, as if they'd just woken up from a particularly vivid dream and couldn't shake off the remnants. Harmless enough at first, everyone had bad days, but then productivity plummeted like an asteroid with a vendetta. "Ever get the feeling something's not quite right?" Cadden asked no one in particular, his eyes scanning the reports. "Only every day since I docked here," Turek replied, lounging in his usual corner with the air of someone who wasn't particularly concerned whether the world ended or not. "What's got your circuits in a twist?" Cadden hesitated, piecing together the disjointed puzzle in his mind. "Something's off. People are acting like they've been mainlining boredom straight into their veins." "Sounds like my kind of party," Turek said, flashing that toothy grin of his. "But I take it this isn't the prelude to a spontaneous nap cycle." "No," Cadden said, shaking his head. "It's more like the station's been dosed with apathy." Captain Keel strode in, her presence as commanding as a battleship at full throttle. "Any updates, Ventra?" "Depends. Do you want the good news first or the bad news?" Keel folded her arms, eyes narrowing. "Start with the bad." "All right," Cadden said, leaning back in his chair with the resignation of someone who's about to recite a doomed grocery list. "We've got personnel not doing their jobs, systems going down because no one's around to maintain them, and, oh yeah, an unknown source that's apparently turning everyone into zombies." "And the good news?" Keel prompted, though her tone suggested she wasn't expecting much. "The coffee machine's still working," Cadden replied with a straight face. "So at least we won't face total anarchy." "Small mercies," Keel said, her expression a mix of frustration and bemusement. "What's the cause?" Cadden shrugged, spreading his hands wide. "Your guess is as good as mine. I've got a suspicion it's tied to those ships, though, call it a hunch." Arcadia interjected with her usual timing. "I've been monitoring brainwave patterns across the station. There's a subtle alteration, a little tweak here, a little nudge there, almost like mind control," Turek suggested, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Or extremely advanced advertising," Cadden added, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Either way, it's not doing wonders for morale." Keel frowned, the gears in her mind practically audible as she processed the implications. "If that's true, then it's more than just a random attack. There's intent behind it." "Intent or not," Arcadia said, "it's putting a real dent in my image as the galaxy's most efficient space station." "Yeah, and we can't have you looking bad," Cadden replied, "or my life will be a lot less interesting." "So what's the plan?" Turek asked, his tone casual yet probing. "Surely you don't intend to sit around and wait for everyone to start drooling on themselves." "Arcadia, can you isolate the source?" Cadden asked, pulling up schematics on his display. "I love a challenge," Arcadia replied, "but I'll need more data." Keel looked at Cadden, her expression resolute. "Then you'd better get to it, Ventra." "Great," Cadden said with mock enthusiasm. "Because rooting out hidden signals and preventing mass apathy is exactly what I signed up for when I took this job." "You wanted adventure," Turek pointed out. "Just be glad you got it without the usual death and dismemberment." "Small blessings," Cadden muttered, already setting his mind to the task. As he worked, the station's usual hum seemed a touch more ominous, like a beast stirring in its sleep. The crew shuffled by, their movements slow and listless, eyes glazed over like marbles lost in thought. It was unsettling, like a zombie movie without the flesh-eating. Cadden dug deeper into the data, cross-referencing neural scans with activity logs. The patterns were subtle, just out of reach, like trying to recall a dream that slipped through your fingers upon waking. But there was something there, hiding beneath the surface. "What's that?" Turek asked, peering over Cadden's shoulder. "Neural patterns," Cadden replied, pointing at the display. "There's a frequency spike right here. It's faint, but it's consistent across all affected personnel." "So it is a signal," Keel said, leaning in to examine the data. "Can we track it?" "I'm working on it," Cadden said, fingers flying over the console. "If I can isolate the frequency, I might be able to trace it back to its source." "I knew there was a reason we kept you around," Arcadia teased, her voice a playful lilt. Yeah, Cadden replied. "Just don't expect me to start doing everything for you." After what felt like an eternity of deciphering the cryptic code, Cadden finally isolated the signal. It was coming from one of the outer sectors, a part of the station that had been repurposed for storage and largely forgotten. The kind of place you'd only go if you had a penchant for dust and a strong aversion to sunlight. "Looks like we've got a lead," Cadden said, pulling up a map of the station. Keel nodded. "I'll assemble a team. We'll check it out." Cadden held up a hand. "I'm coming with you." "You sure about that?" Turek asked, cocking an eyebrow. "Not really your area of expertise." "Maybe not," Cadden admitted, "but I've got a vested interest in figuring this out. Plus, if I'm going to keep this station running, I need to know what we're dealing with." "Fair point," Keel said, "but stay close. I don't want to have to explain to HQ why our liaison officer got himself turned into a mindless drone." "Don't worry," Cadden replied. "I've got a black belt in not getting turned into a zombie." Keel rolled her eyes but didn't protest further, gesturing for Cadden to follow. The trek to the outer sector was uneventful, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a vibroblade. The corridors were dimly lit, the flickering lights casting unsettling shadows that danced along the walls like restless phantoms. As they approached the source of the signal, Cadden felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just the cold, stale air. It was the sense that they were walking into something far bigger than they'd anticipated. The storage area was a maze of crates and containers, some stacked haphazardly, others sealed with the kind of security you'd expect for military-grade weaponry. Keel and her team moved with practiced efficiency, weapons at the ready. "There," Cadden said, pointing to a console nestled between two large crates. "That's where the signal's coming from." The team approached cautiously, and Keel gestured for Cadden to take a look. He approached the console, the screen alive with a series of complex readouts and alien characters. It was a language he didn't recognize, but the meaning was clear enough. This was the source. "Can you shut it down?" Keel asked, her eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. "I can try," Cadden replied, fingers dancing across the unfamiliar interface. It was a gamble. He had no idea what would happen if he deactivated the device. But considering the alternative, it was a risk worth taking. "Got it," he said after a tense moment, the device powering down with a soft whine. Almost immediately, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The oppressive weight that had hung over them seemed to lift, if only slightly. "Nice work," Keel said, lowering her weapon. "Don't thank me yet," Cadden replied. "We still don't know who set this up or why." As if on cue, a low hum filled the air, the lights flickering ominously. Keel's team snapped to attention, weapons raised as a figure emerged from the shadows. Turek stepped forward, his expression one of bemused interest. "Well, isn't this a cozy little setup?" Cadden's eyes narrowed, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Turek's smile was enigmatic, as if he were privy to a joke only he understood. "Let's just say I had my suspicions." "Care to share with the class?" Keel demanded, her patience wearing thin. "Patience, Captain," Turek said, holding up a placating hand. "I'm as much in the dark as you, but I do know this technology isn't Vellari." "Then who's behind it?" Cadden asked, though he suspected Turek wasn't going to hand him the answer on a silver platter. "That," Turek replied, "is the million-credit question." Keel frowned, clearly not satisfied. "We need answers, not riddles." "Answers will come," Turek assured her. But for now, I suggest we return to somewhere less exposed. Cadden couldn't argue with that. The sense of unease was still lingering, like the aftertaste of a bad meal. As they made their way back, he couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only scratched the surface of something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The mystery of the enemy ships deepened with every question unanswered, and Cadden knew that whatever lay ahead, it was bound to be more complicated than any of them anticipated. One thing was for certain: the station had become a very interesting place to be, and not necessarily in a good way. Back at the command hub, Cadden slumped into his chair, letting out a long breath. "Well, that was fun," he said, an edge of sarcasm sharpening his words. Keel, standing with arms crossed, snorted. "If your idea of fun includes being shot at and mind manipulated, then sure. Loads of fun." Turak smirked, his amusement evident. "For what it's worth, I found it rather enlightening." "Enlightening?" Cadden echoed, one eyebrow quirking upwards. "We just shut down a mind control device and we still have no idea who's responsible." "True," Turak acknowledged, "but consider what we've gained. A new mystery, an opportunity to test your wits, and the chance to save your lovely station from total functional collapse." Cadden rolled his eyes. "Right, because that's just what I need. More problems." Arcadia chimed in with her 2 cents. "Look on the bright side, Cadden. At least you're never bored." "Yeah," Cadden said, rubbing his temples. "Never bored, always exasperated." As the hub settled into its usual rhythm, Cadden knew the real challenge lay ahead. They had stopped the immediate threat, but the specter of a larger conspiracy loomed over them. Whoever was behind this wasn't done, and neither was he. "Arcadia, keep an eye out for any unusual activity," Cadden instructed, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Always," Arcadia replied, her tone laced with determination. "And Cadden?" "Yeah?" he asked, glancing at the display. "Try not to get yourself killed, would you? It'd be dreadfully boring without your antics." Cadden chuckled despite himself. "I'll do my best." With renewed resolve, he turned his focus back to the display. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than ever. "Whatever, looks like all the excitement's over," Cadden murmured as the command hub settled back into its usual barely controlled chaos. Keel was busy berating a few junior officers, her voice a sharp, abrasive reminder that discipline wasn't just a word for the dictionary. Turak lounged against a console, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth like a cat with a secret stash of cream. "Excitement's just a word people use to make bad decisions sound good," Turak replied, watching Cadden with eyes that practically twinkled with mischief. "Speaking of which, how's your head? Still buzzing from all the mind control games?" "Like a hive of angry bees," Cadden replied, massaging his temples. "I suppose we should expect more of that since we've only scratched the surface. Or maybe you're just allergic to common sense," Turak suggested, his voice dripping with amusement. Cadden snorted. "Common sense went out the airlock with the first unidentified ship. Speaking of which, we've got to stop this mind control nonsense before I start thinking painting walls beige is a good idea." "So what's the plan?" Keel asked, her tone all business now that she'd finished her tongue-lashing routine. She crossed her arms, eyes like twin lasers aimed at Cadden. "Simple," Cadden said, though nothing about this mess was simple. "We need to figure out who's behind this and why they're turning the station's crew into zombies. Zombies with terrible taste in interior design," Turak added helpfully. "And we're going to do that by," Keel prompted, arching an eyebrow in expectation. Cadden leaned back, the chair creaking ominously beneath his weight. "By trying to curb the addiction these devices are causing. If we can stop people from being mind-numbed, we might stand a chance of figuring out what the Vellari are up to." "The Vellari?" Keel frowned. "How do they fit into all this?" "Call it a hunch," Cadden said, "or paranoia, whichever fits." "Paranoia's a survival skill," Turak quipped. "At least out here. Right, so let's talk about how we're going to stop our folks from turning into drooling idiots," Cadden said, bringing the conversation back to the problem at hand. "Arcadia, any luck with those personnel files?" I've been knee-deep in data, darling, Arcadia replied, an edge of sass to her voice. And I think I've found something. Well, don't leave us hanging, Cadden said, gesturing for the AI to continue. There's a significant link between the affected personnel and a recent supply shipment, Arcadia explained, her voice as smooth as metal on velvet. Seems the cargo contained more than just the usual rations and replacement parts. What are we looking at, Arcadia? Keel asked, leaning in. Receivers embedded into everyday items, Arcadia said. They're designed to emit a frequency that affects human brainwaves. It's like a subliminal message on steroids. Lovely, Cadden muttered. And I suppose the Vellari are getting a kick out of watching us stumble around like drunken toddlers. That'd be my guess, Turek said. If I were a betting man, which you are, Cadden pointed out. Details, Turek replied with a dismissive wave. So, if these receivers are turning our crew into mindless automatons, Keel said, how do we stop it? We need to find them and disable them, Cadden stated. Ladies and gents, we're going on a scavenger hunt. Sounds like a party, Turek said, stretching his arms like a cat ready for a nap. Not the kind of party you're used to, Cadden shot back, unless you've developed a taste for busting up alien tech. Keel rolled her eyes. Gear up. If this mess gets any worse, none of us will have to worry about retirement. The team moved quickly, the clanking of boots on metal flooring a reminder of the urgency. Cadden led the way, the map of Arcadia's labyrinthine corridors glowing on his wrist display. Each step seemed to echo with the gravity of their task: find the receivers, disable them, and try not to die in the process. Let's start in the residential sectors, Cadden suggested. It's where most of the crew spend their off hours. Can't imagine why they'd want to escape the glorious monotony of this place, Turek mused, his voice a lazy drawl. They reached the residential corridors, the walls lined with identical doors leading to identical rooms. If the monotony didn't drive you insane, the mind-control devices probably would. All right, let's get to work, Keel ordered, her voice a sharp command that brooked no argument. They split into pairs, combing through the rooms with a thoroughness born of desperation. Each room was a small, personal shrine to individuality, cluttered with odd trinkets and half-finished projects. Cadden wondered, not for the first time, about the lives these people led beyond the station's walls. Got one, Turek called out, holding up a small, innocuous-looking object. It was a clock, a standard issue, unremarkable in every way except for the tiny device embedded within. That's one down, Cadden said, taking the clock from Turek and examining it closely. A few dozen more to go. They moved through the halls, disabling each receiver they found. It was tedious work, but as each device was rendered inert, Cadden felt a small measure of victory. It was like a game of hide and seek, only with the stakes ramped up to life-or-death levels. How many more? Keel asked, her voice tense with impatience. Arcadia? Cadden inquired, hoping the AI had a better handle on the numbers. About half a dozen left, she replied. You're making good time. I'm almost proud. Almost. The word hung in the air, a reminder that nothing was ever easy, not even praise. As they moved to the next sector, Cadden's mind wandered back to the Vellari. Why go to all this trouble? What did they stand to gain by turning Arcadia into a playground for their twisted games? Mind if I ask you something, Turek? Cadden said, breaking the silence that had settled over them like a shroud. Ask away, though I can't promise I'll answer, Turek replied, his usual enigmatic smile in place. Why didn't you mention any of this sooner? You knew something was up, didn't you? Turek stopped, turning to face Cadden. His expression was unreadable, a mask of practiced indifference. I had my suspicions, but suspicions and proof aren't the same thing. And now, Cadden pressed, unwilling to let the matter drop. Now I'm just as curious as you are, Turek said. Whoever's behind this isn't showing their cards yet. Cadden nodded, not entirely satisfied with the answer but willing to let it rest for now. Fair enough. Let's just hope we're not playing against a stacked deck. They continued their search, and finally, in a small common area, they found it, the last receiver. It was embedded in a wall-mounted entertainment console, discreet enough to go unnoticed by the casual eye. "That's the last of them," Keel said, her tone one of relief mixed with weariness. "Good. Now maybe we can start thinking straight again," Cadden replied, disconnecting the device with a satisfying snap. As they made their way back to the command hub, Cadden couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something important. The Vellari's motives remained a tantalizing mystery, and while they'd managed a temporary reprieve, the real battle was far from over. "Arcadia, keep monitoring for any new signals," Cadden instructed as they walked. "If the Vellari try something else, I want us to be ready." "Already on it, Cadden," Arcadia replied, her voice a comforting presence amidst the chaos. As they entered the hub, Cadden couldn't help but notice the change. The crew moved with a renewed sense of purpose, the fog of apathy lifting like a morning mist. It was a small victory, but in this hard, unforgiving stretch of the universe, small victories were all they had. "So what now?" Turek asked, leaning against the wall with casual ease. "Now we wait and watch," Cadden replied. "And hope we're prepared for whatever comes next." "Hope's a dangerous thing," Keel said, but there was a hint of a smile in her voice. "Maybe," Cadden agreed, "but it's all we've got." The three of them stood there for a moment, a brief pause in the relentless flow of duty and danger. It was a moment of calm before the storm, a chance to breathe, to regroup, to remember that even in the darkest times they weren't alone. "So," Turek said, breaking the silence with his usual irreverence, "anyone up for a game of cards?" "I promise not to cheat," Keel snorted. "You cheat at everything, Turek." "That's only because I'm better at it than you," Turek retorted with a wink. "But seriously, anyone," Cadden chuckled. "Why not? Could use a bit of normalcy before the universe tries to kill us again." The three of them settled down, the tension easing just a bit. They dealt the cards, the small ritual grounding them in a reality that seemed increasingly surreal. And as they played, Cadden couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. The Vellari's game was far from over, and with every card laid on the table, the stakes grew higher. But for now, he would take solace in their small victory, however fleeting. "Here's to surviving another day," he said, raising an imaginary glass. "To survival," Keel agreed. "And to keeping the boredom at bay," Turek added with a grin. They played on, the cards a comforting distraction from the shadows lurking just out of sight. For the moment, the galaxy's troubles could wait. They would be there, waiting, when the game was done. Cadden leaned against the command hub's console, feeling like a lone soldier on the last frontier, or more accurately, a janitor cleaning up after a cosmic frat party. The bright lights of the monitors blinked with an indifferent rhythm, like a heart that didn't care whether or not it kept beating. "Arcadia, give me the good news," Cadden asked, though he already knew the punchline to this cruel joke. "Good news." "On Arcadia, darling, you've got higher hopes than a lottery ticket buyer." Arcadia's holographic form flickered into view, her humor as dry as the Martian desert. "Addiction levels are spiking, and it seems I'm hosting the galaxy's largest drool fest." "Great," Cadden muttered. "More zombies than a Sunday holoflick marathon." "We're one bad musical number away from a full-blown apocalypse," Turek added, leaning back in his chair with the kind of relaxed demeanor you only get from being utterly resigned to impending doom. "Do we know how the Vellari are tightening the screws?" Keel asked, pulling her hair into a tight ponytail as if it might somehow keep her brains from leaking out under the pressure. "Arcadia, scan for any signals we missed," Cadden ordered, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if he could pinch out the headache building there. "I'm on it, Cadden, but let's not expect miracles." "I'm pretty sure those went out with the last shipment of optimism," Arcadia replied, her voice smooth and untroubled. Like she wasn't managing a station full of people one blink away from being couch potatoes for life. As the AI worked, Cadden surveyed the command hub. The place was buzzing with activity, but it was the kind of frantic energy that suggested nobody knew what they were doing. It was like watching a bunch of toddlers try to build a sandcastle in a hurricane. "So, what's the next move, boss?" Turek asked, tossing a ball of scrunched paper into the trash with the precision of a man who spent too much time aiming for things that didn't matter. "We need a way to break this grip," Cadden said, his voice carrying the weight of a man trying to negotiate an impossible peace treaty. "Find something the Vellari didn't plan for." "And what's that? A miracle?" Keel's voice dripped with sarcasm, as if she'd replaced her morning coffee with a shot of cynicism. "Yeah, because those are just falling from the sky," Cadden replied, rolling his eyes. "No, we need to think like they don't. What's the one thing they'd never expect from us?" "A coherent plan," Turek suggested. "No, it's us banding together," Cadden said, trying to inject some optimism into his voice. "The Vellari are counting on us being a bunch of self-serving jerks." "Well, we're halfway there," Keel muttered, crossing her arms. Cadden ignored the comment and turned back to the console. "Arcadia, any sign of new signals or interference?" "Nothing we didn't already know, dear," Arcadia replied. "Though I suppose that's a kind of good news, but don't get too excited." "Right?" Cadden sighed. "We need a way to sever their hold, and fast." Turek leaned over the console, peering at the readouts like they might suddenly spell out the answer to all their problems. "Maybe if we throw enough chaos at their plan, they'll get confused and leave." "That's a plan worthy of a madman," Cadden replied, but the idea had a certain appeal. Mad ideas were their only hope at this point. "Arcadia, what about a station-wide blackout? Would that disrupt the receiver's signals?" "It's a possibility," Arcadia said, sounding almost impressed. "And by possibility, I mean it's as likely to work as it is to explode in our faces." "Isn't that just our luck?" Keel snorted. "Option A, vague hope of success. Option B, guaranteed disaster." "Sounds like every choice I've ever made," Turek mused. "Let's do it." Cadden hesitated. The plan was risky, but so was sitting around doing nothing. And if they were going to swing, they needed to swing hard, even if it was at the wrong ball. "All right," Cadden said, making the decision. "Let's prep for a blackout." "It's not like we've got a better plan." "Famous last words," Keel muttered, but she moved to help, her demeanor all business. The preparation was chaotic, and Cadden felt more like a circus ringleader than a commander. As they worked, a part of him wondered why anyone would ever want this job. Probably masochism, he decided. "Everyone in position," Cadden called out above the noise. "Ready as we'll ever be," Turek called back, his tone suggesting he was bracing for the kind of chaos that could only end in a really spectacular obituary. "Arcadia, go dark," Cadden ordered, feeling the weight of the decision press down on him like a lead blanket. "Going dark," Arcadia confirmed. "Hope you've got candles." This is going to be a rough ride. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the hub was plunged into darkness. The silence that followed was almost oppressive, as though the void outside had seeped in through the cracks. "Everyone all right?" Cadden asked, though he half expected silence in return. "Still kicking," Keel replied from somewhere in the dark. "Feels like camping," Turek added. "Except without the fun campfire stories and s'mores." "Let's hope this works," Cadden said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Time crawled by, each second dragging the last along like a reluctant child. Cadden could almost hear the universe holding its breath, waiting to see if their gamble would pay off. "Arcadia status?" Cadden asked, the words echoing in the dark. "Signals are fluctuating," Arcadia reported. "We might have them on the ropes, or they're just laughing at our incompetence." "Either way, at least we're entertaining," Turek quipped. The lights blinked back to life, and for a moment Cadden dared to hope they had actually done it. But it was always darkest before the dawn, or after the lights turned back on, as it turned out. Cadden," Keel's voice was hesitant, which was never a good sign. "You might want to see this." Cadden turned to the main display and his stomach dropped. The unidentified ships loomed larger than ever, like hungry wolves circling a wounded prey. Whatever they'd done, the Vellari were about to make them pay for it. "Looks like someone wasn't amused," Turek said, his attempt at humor falling flat against the grim scene. "Arcadia, can we get a message out? Anything?" Cadden asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Only if you want everyone to hear our theory on how screwed we are," Arcadia replied. Comm channels are still jammed. Cadden didn't have time for frustration. They needed a new plan, and they needed it 10 minutes ago. All right, we need to regroup, Cadden said, trying to rally what was left of their morale. Let's get the crew to the emergency stations. Keel nodded, already moving. We'll need all hands on deck if we're going to have any hope of getting through this. Assuming we do, Turek said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd bet on the wrong horse once too often. The urgency in the command hub was palpable, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Cadden felt the weight of every decision, every command pressing down on him with the inevitability of gravity. Whatever happens, Cadden said, raising his voice to carry above the noise, we stick together. We've faced worse odds. Liar, Turek called out, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. But hey, I'm still here. Wouldn't be the same without you, Cadden replied with a smirk. With the crew scrambling to their stations, Cadden took a moment to survey the scene. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. Like the universe itself, always on the brink of collapse, yet somehow always holding together. Arcadia, what's the best-case scenario here? Cadden asked, knowing full well the answer. Best case. We survive long enough for a miracle, Arcadia said, her voice steady despite the situation. Worst case, we become a footnote in someone else's history book. Optimism, thy name is Arcadia, Cadden muttered, shaking his head. As the countdown to disaster continued, Cadden felt a strange sense of calm. This was it, the darkest moment where hope seemed like a folly and survival a distant dream. But he'd been in dark places before, and he knew the only way out was through. Let's give them hell, he said, more to himself than anyone else. And as the seconds ticked by, Cadden prepared to face whatever came next, determined to steer Arcadia through the storm, come what may. Because in the end, hope was all they had, and sometimes hope was enough. The command hub of Arcadia was abuzz with the kind of chaotic energy that could only come from a room full of people who knew they were in deep trouble, but were too stubborn to lie down and die. Cadden Ventra, the closest thing they had to a leader, stood in the center, trying to channel the spirit of a motivational poster that might have read, "Hang in there, babe," if it weren't for the fact that every kitten on those posters had probably already been eaten by the Vellari. All right, listen up, Cadden shouted over the clamor, his voice straining against the ambient noise of impending doom. I know we're up to our necks in it, but I've got a plan. A plan, Turek drawled from his corner, arms crossed like he was waiting for a miracle or a good reason to laugh. Is this the same kind of plan that got us into this mess? No, this one's different, Cadden snapped back, trying not to sound defensive. This one involves us not dying. How's that for a novelty? Sounds ambitious, Keel chimed in, her face a portrait of skepticism. But I'm game. What's the angle? Cadden took a deep breath, because if he didn't get this right, there'd be more vaporized atoms than there were stars in the sky. Arcadia, can you bring up the map? He asked, gesturing at the main display. Sure thing, Cadden, Arcadia replied, her voice the epitome of calm amid the storm. Here's the layout of our lovely death trap. The holographic map flickered to life, showing the labyrinthine interior of Arcadia. Cadden pointed to a section highlighted in red, a place that looked, on a good day, like the universe's least inviting hotel lobby. This, he said, gesturing with a flourish too grand for someone who knew how likely it was they'd all be dead soon. This is where we regroup. The old maintenance sector, Turek asked, raising an eyebrow. That's the plan. Hide in the broom closet until they go away. Close, Cadden replied, not missing a beat. But no, we use it as our base to coordinate a resistance. It's the one part of the station the Vellari haven't messed with yet. Probably because they have standards. Keel snorted, and Cadden couldn't help but appreciate the sound. Laughter, even the sarcastic kind, was a rare commodity these days. And how exactly do we turn a maintenance sector into a fortress? Not a fortress, Cadden corrected. A think tank. We utilize the only thing the Vellari can't predict, human creativity. Creativity, Turek repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Thought that stuff went out with the last shipment of optimism. Turns out, Cadden said with a wry grin, we've got a secret stash. The plan was simple. Gather the best minds still capable of coherent thought, pool their ideas, and figure out how to disrupt the mind control network. It was either that or wait for the Vellari to tighten their grip until everyone was too busy drooling to notice they'd been conquered. All right, folks, Cadden said, clapping his hands together. Let's get moving. Time to show the universe what a bunch of desperate idiots can do. Famous last words, Keel muttered, but she was already organizing the crew, her movements precise and efficient. As the team hustled towards the maintenance sector, Cadden felt a strange sense of hope creep in. It was the kind of hope you felt when you were buying a lottery ticket, irrational, but impossible to ignore. Once they reached the old maintenance sector, it was clear that luxurious wasn't a term anyone would use to describe it. The place had all the charm of a storage closet after a particularly wild office party, complete with flickering lights and an air filter that wheezed like a geriatric asthmatic. Home sweet home, Turek said, flopping down on an overturned bin like he was settling in for a long nap. Don't get too comfortable, Cadden warned. We've got work to do. Keel was already clearing a space on one of the work tables, spreading out diagrams and data like they were planning a heist. All right, genius, she said, looking at Cadden. Let's hear it. What's our great creative solution? It's not about one solution, Cadden replied, pulling up a chair. It's about 100 small ideas that together can tip the scales. We need to think about the one thing the Vellari can't plan for. And what's that? Turek asked, idly kicking a loose bolt across the floor. Us, Cadden said, leaning in as if sharing a secret. They expect us to be predictable, to follow protocols, but we're human. We're irrational, emotional, and damned if we aren't stubborn as a comet on a collision course. Sounds like you've been reading too many motivational posters, Keel said, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. Whatever it takes, Cadden replied, shrugging. Over the next few hours, they hashed out ideas like gamblers at a poker table, each one throwing down their wildest concepts in the hopes that something would stick. From electromagnetic pulses to makeshift jammers, the plans were as varied as they were half-baked. Turek suggested using the station's old mining equipment to create a massive diversion, something that would make enough noise to distract the Vellari ships. Keel countered with a plan to flood the comm channels with static, a makeshift white noise that could confuse their systems. Crazy enough to work, Cadden said, nodding. Let's start with the mining equipment. Turek, you're on that. Got it, Turek said, already up and moving. Nothing like a bit of chaos to liven things up. Keel, you're on the jammers, Cadden continued. See if you can rig something to mess with their frequencies. On it, Keel replied, her fingers already dancing over the console like a concert pianist preparing for the performance of a lifetime. As the team split off to tackle their respective tasks, Cadden allowed himself a moment to breathe. It was a small victory, getting this far without succumbing to despair. But small victories were all they had, and he'd learned to cherish each one as if it were the last. Arcadia, how's our status? Cadden asked, glancing up at the flickering ceiling lights. We're still flying below the radar, Arcadia replied, her voice as soothing as a lullaby sung by a serial killer. The Vellari haven't noticed anything. Yet, good, Cadden said, trying to ignore the yet clinging to the end of her sentence like an ominous shadow. The work continued, each member of the crew pouring their energy into the task at hand, fueled by the kind of desperation that could ignite stars. Hours passed, and the maintenance sector buzzed with the low hum of machinery and the crackle of ideas sparking into existence. Eventually, Turek returned, his expression a mix of triumph and exhaustion. We've got the mining equipment rigged and ready, he announced. One touch of a button and it'll sound like a meteor shower on steroids. Fantastic, Cadden said, feeling a rush of something suspiciously like optimism. Keel, how are the jammers? Keel looked up from her work, her face smeared with grease and determination. We're good to go. The second they try to lock onto us, they'll hear nothing but white noise. All right, Cadden said, nodding. Let's make it happen. Arcadia, you ready? As ready as I'll ever be, Arcadia replied, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of uncertainty. Just give the word. Cadden hesitated for a heartbeat, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. It was a gamble, a long shot that could end in disaster. But it was also a chance to prove that human spirit wasn't so easily broken. Do it, he said, his voice steady and resolute. The response was immediate. The mining equipment roared to life, a cacophony of metal against metal that reverberated through the station like a symphony of chaos. Simultaneously, Keel's jammers engaged, flooding the comm channels with static that screamed like a banshee in the night. For a moment, Cadden dared to hope that they'd caught the Vellari off guard, that the gamble had paid off. But as the echoes of their defiance faded, reality came crashing back with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Cadden, Turek said, his voice tinged with disbelief. We've got company. Cadden turned to the display, his heart sinking as the ships loomed larger, more aggressive than ever. Whatever they'd done, the Vellari weren't about to take it lying down. Looks like we poked the hornet's nest, Keel said, her voice calm despite the situation. Yeah, Cadden replied, feeling the familiar weight of impending doom settle over him once more. But at least they know we're not dead yet. As the Vellari ships moved in, Cadden steeled himself for the fight ahead. They might be outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options, but they weren't out of hope. Not yet. Let's give them a show they won't forget, he said, his voice a rallying cry in the dark. And as the first shots rang out, Cadden knew that whatever happened next, they'd face it together, united by the one thing the Vellari could never understand, the indomitable human spirit. Cadden stood at the center of what passed for their makeshift command post in the old maintenance sector, surrounded by the sound of 100 little plans coming together, or falling apart, depending on the minute. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the grit of exhaustion, and glanced at the holographic map. It blinked back at him, smugly indifferent to their predicament. Cadden, status update. Arcadia's voice crackled over the comms, the station's AI showing more concern than most of the crew combined. Well, Arcadia, we're in the middle of what I'm sure will go down in the annals of history as the most ill-advised resistance effort ever, Cadden quipped, leaning against a console that looked older than his grandmother. How's that for a status? Reassuring as ever, Arcadia replied with a hint of dry humor. The Vellari are adjusting their strategies. It seems they didn't appreciate our last symphony of chaos. Good, Cadden muttered, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Let's make sure they never forget this little dance. Turek ambled over, looking like he just crawled out of a ventilation shaft after a long night of drinking. You know, when I signed up for this gig, I thought there'd be more glamorous space adventures and less of this. Whatever this is, he said, gesturing vaguely. Life's full of disappointments, Cadden replied, slapping a hand on Turek's shoulder. But think of this as a chance to shine, or at least survive. Turek snorted. Funny how those two things don't always go hand in hand. Keel joined them, wiping her hands on a rag that probably should have been incinerated months ago. Jammers are holding steady, but it's only a matter of time before the Vellari figure out how to counter them. Then we need to make our move, Cadden said, his mind racing. We've got to hit their control systems hard before they can regroup. And how do you propose we do that, O fearless leader? Turek asked, crossing his arms as if challenging the universe to come up with something more ridiculous. We improvise, Cadden answered with a grin that was more madness than mirth. We use their tech against them. Arcadia, pull up everything we've got on Vellari systems. The display shifted, filling with diagrams and data on the alien tech that had been the bane of their existence. It was all sleek lines and ominous energy readings, the kind of stuff that looked like it belonged in a horror holoflick. Okay, folks, Cadden said, gathering the team around. Here's the plan. We use their own systems to overload their networks. Hit them where it hurts, hard and fast. And by we you mean, Keel asked, raising an eyebrow. All of us, Cadden replied, looking at each of them in turn. Think of it as a group project. Except, with higher stakes than passing a class. Group projects, Turek muttered. The bane of any self-respecting slacker's existence. Focus, Turek, Cadden said, pointing at the schematics. We've identified a weak point in their network grid. We synchronize a pulse from our jammers to disrupt their command signals, then use the mining equipment to amplify the feedback. Keel frowned, tapping her chin. That's a long shot, Cadden. If we mistime this by a fraction of a second, then it's game over. I know, Cadden interrupted, cutting her off. But it's the best shot we've got. Nothing like betting it all on the long odds, Turek said, shaking his head. I'm in. Of course you are, Cadden shot back. Now let's make sure you don't end up as space debris. They got to work, the room buzzing with a frantic energy that was part desperation, part determination. It was the kind of energy that got things done, if it didn't kill you first. Arcadia, you sure you can handle syncing the pulse? Keel asked, adjusting the controls with a surgeon's precision. Piece of cake, Arcadia replied, a touch too cheerfully for Cadden's taste. Assuming, of course, that cake is made of volatile space tech and the tears of those who've tried and failed. Charming, Cadden muttered, focusing on his console, eyes scanning for any sign of the Vellari catching on. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Each member of the ragtag team was absorbed in their task, a symphony of clacking keys and hushed whispers. Finally, everything was ready. All right, Cadden said, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of equipment. On my mark, we hit the pulse. Arcadia, you'll coordinate the feedback loop. Keel, you monitor the systems and adjust as needed. Turek, keep an eye out for any Vellari response. Roger that, Turek said, his casual tone belying the seriousness of the situation. Cadden took a deep breath, steadying himself. Arcadia, count down from 5. 5, Arcadia began, her voice smoothing out the tension. 4, 3, 2. Cadden's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, all or nothing. 1. Now, Cadden shouted, slamming his hand down on the console. The room exploded in a flurry of activity, lights dimming as power was redirected to their makeshift disruptor. The pulse shot through the systems, and for a moment everything seemed to hang in the balance. Then the station shuddered, the sound of the mining equipment roaring to life echoing through the halls. Feedback is good, Keel reported, her voice rising above the noise. We're in the green. Vellari signals are fluctuating, Arcadia added. They're scrambling. For the first time in what felt like forever, Cadden allowed himself a flicker of hope. They were doing it. They were actually doing it. And then, because the universe has a sick sense of humor, the entire station lurched violently, throwing them all off balance. What the hell was that? Turek shouted, grabbing onto a nearby console to steady himself. Looks like the Vellari didn't appreciate our little concert, Cadden replied, struggling to stay on his feet. They're countering. Hard. Keel was already at the controls, fingers flying as she worked to stabilize the systems. I'm rerouting power to shields. We've got to hold out. Arcadia status, Cadden barked, adrenaline surging through his veins. Their network's compromised, but not for long, Arcadia said. We need to reinforce the feedback loop. On it, Cadden said, rushing to help Keel. Together they worked frantically, adjusting, recalibrating, doing everything they could to maintain the pulse. The station shook again, but this time they were ready, holding their ground. Almost there, Keel said, her voice a mixture of concentration and determination. Turek looked up from his console, his usual sarcasm replaced by something akin to earnestness. We've got incoming. Vellari ships closing in fast. Lovely, Cadden muttered under his breath. Keel, keep those jammers going. Turek, see if you can buy us some time. Turek nodded, already moving to another console, his fingers a blur as he initiated a series of evasive maneuvers. Arcadia, any chance we can give them a nasty surprise? Cadden asked, eyes flicking to the holographic map where the enemy ships were closing in. Working on it, Arcadia replied, her tone suggesting she was doing the digital equivalent of rolling up her sleeves. If I can reroute the power from the secondary systems, we might just have enough juice to give them a parting gift. Make it happen, Cadden said, the words half request, half prayer. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, each one feeling like an eternity as they fought to hold their ground. Outside the station, the Vellari ships circled like hungry wolves, waiting for a lapse, a mistake, anything they could exploit. "Feedback loop is holding," Keel announced, relief coloring her voice. "And the Vellari?" Cadden asked, his gaze fixed on the display. "Still scrambling. We've thrown them off balance, but they are regrouping fast," Arcadia said. "Then let's make sure they're too busy to bother," Cadden said, a grim determination settling over him. "Got it," Turek shouted, a triumphant grin splitting his face. "I've managed to divert a power surge right into their primary channels. They won't know what hit him." Cadden allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but only a moment. "Good work. Now let's see if we can't give them a little more to worry about." As the Vellari ships continued their approach, the station's defenses hummed to life, cobbled together from whatever they had left. It wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. "Arcadia, initiate the surge," Cadden ordered, bracing for the backlash. "With pleasure," Arcadia replied, her voice carrying a hint of mischief. The surge rippled out from the station, an invisible wave of disruption that hit the Vellari ships with the force of a sledgehammer. For a brief, glorious moment, their advance faltered, the ships veering wildly as they struggled against the unexpected assault. "Direct hit," Keel shouted, her eyes shining with triumph. "We've got them on the ropes." But the exhilaration was short-lived as the Vellari regrouped, their response swift and brutal. The station rocked under the assault, alarms blaring their discordant warnings. "Cadden, we've got to fall back," Turek said, urgency lacing his words. "We can't keep this up." Cadden nodded, knowing he was right. They'd made their point, bought themselves precious time. But now it was time to retreat, regroup, and plan their next move. "All right, everyone, you heard him," Cadden said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Fall back to the secondary defenses. Let's give them hell on the way out." As they moved, the weight of their actions settled over Cadden. They'd taken a stand, proved to themselves and the universe that they weren't beaten. Not yet. And for the first time in a long time, Cadden felt something akin to hope. Because while they might be battered, bruised, and outnumbered, they were still standing. And as long as they were standing, there was a chance. The command hub, now a grand mess of sparking wires and half-melted consoles, looked like it had hosted a rave for deranged robots. Cadden surveyed the damage, his heart still pounding with the aftermath of their desperate gambit. The Vellari had retreated for now, but that didn't mean they weren't lurking around, waiting for the next chance to grind them into space dust. "Nice work, everyone," Cadden said, though the words felt as hollow as a politician's promise. "We've lived to fight another day." Turek, rubbing a sore spot on his shoulder where a console corner had introduced itself during the chaos, flashed a tired grin. Who knew the key to interstellar diplomacy was giving them a good kick in the circuitry? "Certainly beats the hell out of poetry and handshakes," Keel replied, shoving a mass of tangled cables out of her way. "I always knew you were better with your fists than your words, Turek." "Thanks, I think," Turek said, plopping into a chair that looked about ready to collapse. "Arcadia, how are we looking? In need of a serious spa day," Arcadia replied, her voice glitched and jittery, like she was recovering from a digital hangover. "I'll be fine, but the station systems are a bit like wet tissue paper right now." "I wouldn't recommend any sudden movements," Cadden sighed, running a hand through his hair which felt more like a bird's nest with each passing crisis. "Well, let's add that to the to-do list. Don't do anything stupid. Can we put that on a plaque?" Keel suggested, shooting Cadden a look that was half serious, half amused. "A daily reminder of our collective restraint." As if daily reminders ever worked, Turek snorted, leaning back precariously. Meanwhile, the monitors flickered back to life, their glow casting an eerie light across the room. The holographic map displayed an update. Vellari ships had retreated to a safe distance. For now, they'd given up their siege, but that didn't mean Cadden could relax. Far from it. "Arcadia, any chance we can leverage this moment of peace?" Cadden asked, trying to sound more hopeful than he felt. I've already begun purging the remaining Vellari influence from our systems, Arcadia replied, her tone gaining confidence as her processes stabilized. Their mind control tech is more tangled than a politician's expense report, but we're getting there. Good, Cadden said, nodding. Once we've shaken off their tech, maybe we can start figuring out how to patch things up. Patch things up. Turek's voice rose an octave, a thin veneer of sarcasm in his tone. You mean like inviting them over for tea and pretending they didn't just try to fry our brains? Cadden shrugged, a weary smile playing on his lips. Something like that. If we can show them we're not pushovers, maybe they'll be open to a more civilized discussion. Civilized, Keel scoffed. That word has lost all meaning out here, and yet we keep using it, Cadden replied. Arcadia, keep monitoring their movements. Let me know if they decide to get twitchy again. Will do, Captain, Arcadia said, her voice still holding a hint of static but regaining its usual competence. As the adrenaline wore off, the exhaustion hit Cadden like a freight ship, leaving him feeling like he'd been trampled by a herd of intergalactic camels. The crew had to be feeling it too, but there was no room for weakness here. They couldn't afford it, not with the Vellari looming in the wings like an overly curious shadow. All right, everyone, Cadden said, clapping his hands together, though the sound was more of a feeble attempt to keep himself awake. Let's regroup in the maintenance sector. I think we've earned ourselves a break. A break, Turek echoed, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. What's that again? Something from ancient human history, right? Cadden replied, smirking. Something like naps and snacks. Remember those? Barely, Keel said, rolling her eyes as she shoved Turek's chair back into an upright position. But I wouldn't say no to either. As they made their way through the dimly lit corridors, the station's damage became more apparent. Burned-out lights, panels hanging by a wire, floors littered with debris from previous skirmishes. It was a wonder the place hadn't completely given up on them. Then again, Arcadia had a stubborn streak, almost human-like in her persistence. Maybe she liked her tenants feisty. They reached the old maintenance sector, which served as more of a hideout than a command post these days. It was cluttered with salvaged equipment, mismatched chairs, and a rickety table that had seen better days. Despite the chaos, it felt like home. Home sweet dumpster, Turek quipped, flopping down onto a couch that puffed out more dust than comfort. Keel joined him, shaking her head. I keep meaning to clean this place up, but then I remember we might all die tomorrow, and it seems like a waste of time. Priorities, Cadden agreed, taking a seat on an overturned crate. Arcadia, keep an ear out for any incoming signals. Consider me your cosmic watchdog, Arcadia replied, her tone managing to be both playful and reassuring. The silence that followed was a welcome change, though it was fraught with unspoken concerns. They had bought themselves some time, but the looming threat of the Vellari was like a storm cloud on the horizon. It was only a matter of when, not if, they'd have to face it again. Hey, Cadden, Turek said, his voice breaking the quiet. You think we can really sit down with these Vellari folks? Talk things out like reasonable beings? Cadden leaned back, the crate creaking ominously under his weight. Honestly, I have no damn idea. But if there's a chance we can avoid becoming stardust, it's worth a shot. Optimistic, Keel said, her voice tinged with sarcasm. Hasn't gotten us killed yet, so that's something. High praise, Cadden replied, rolling his eyes. But seriously, if we can at least make them think twice before trying to puppet us again, I'll call it a win. Guess we've got nothing to lose except everything, Turek deadpanned, stretching out on the couch with a yawn. Exactly, Cadden said, his voice carrying more conviction than he felt. We've faced worse odds and we're still here to bitch about it. Words to live by, Keel said with a chuckle, though there was a hard edge to her amusement. For a moment they allowed themselves the luxury of hope. It was fragile like a glass sculpture in a room full of clumsy giants, but it was there. And in the vast, uncaring expanse of space, that was enough. Arcadia, Cadden called out, breaking the brief silence. Any updates on our guests? Still hanging back, Arcadia replied. Their ships are keeping a safe distance like they are debating whether we're worth the trouble. They'd better be, Turak commented, a mocking edge to his voice. Otherwise, we'll have to prove it all over again. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Cadden said, rubbing the back of his neck. But if it does, we'll be ready. Keel nodded, her expression serious. Ready as we can be anyway. You know, for a bunch of misfits in a floating scrap heap. That's the spirit, Cadden replied, his smile more grim than cheerful. The station hummed around them, the faint vibration a constant reminder of their precarious situation. With the Vellari momentarily at bay, they could turn their attention to the more pressing issue of not falling apart. Literally. All right, Cadden said, standing and stretching his back until it popped. Let's see if we can't patch up some of this mess. Arcadia, how's the system purge coming? Steady as she goes, Arcadia replied, more focused now. The influence is nearly gone. I estimate another few hours before we're clear. Good, Cadden said, nodding. Give us a heads up the moment anything changes. Will do, boss, Arcadia said, her tone lightening. As Cadden set to work alongside Keel and Turak, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of pride. They were battered but unbroken, beaten but unbowed. And as long as they had breath in their lungs and fire in their hearts, they'd keep fighting. Not just for survival, but for the chance to find something better in the cold, indifferent universe. Hey, Cadden, Turak said, looking up from a tangle of wires. If we do manage to sit down with the Vellari, what's your opening line? Cadden paused, a wry smile creeping across his face. How about next time bring flowers before you try mind control? Keel snorted, her laughter echoing in the cramped space. Yeah, that'll win them over. Worth a shot, Cadden said, shrugging. As long as they're not aiming plasma cannons at us, I'll consider it a conversation, and if they are, Turak asked, raising an eyebrow. Then we've got bigger problems than bad first impressions, Cadden replied, his voice steady. With that, they returned to their work, each of them knowing the unspoken truth. They were far from safe, far from secure, but at least they weren't alone. And in the vast, uncaring void, that was a victory all its own. As the hours passed and the station slowly began to feel more stable, Cadden allowed himself the thought that, just maybe, they'd made it out of this one. But he knew better than to let his guard down completely. The universe had a way of sneaking up on you with a sucker punch when you least expected it. Arcadia, Cadden said, pausing in his repairs. When this is all over, remind me to install some actual defenses on this rust bucket. Consider it added to the list, Arcadia replied. Right after, don't do anything stupid. Sounds about right, Cadden said, shaking his head with a bemused grin. As the station drifted through the silent expanse, the crew worked on, a stubborn band of misfits determined to survive against all odds. They'd face whatever came their way, with cynicism, sarcasm, and a touch of dark humor to light their path. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human in the unforgiving dance of stars.